Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar on changing the demographics of occupied Kashmir, understanding the new domicile laws. That's the title of the webinar that you registered for. I'm Deepti Misri. I'm a faculty member at the University of Colorado, Boulder, and a Kashmiri scholar of Kashmir. And I'm honored to be in conversation today with three Kashmiri legal experts who I will introduce shortly as we go around. So we are here today for an in-depth discussion on the new rules recently introduced by the Indian government, redefining the conditions of domicile in Kashmir. These moves, as many of you will know, are a follow-up to the dramatic events of August 5th of last year, when the Indian government read down Article 370, suspended Kashmir's semi-autonomous status from the Indian Union, and bifurcated the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir into two union territories under direct rule from New Delhi. So since March of this year, while the world has been preoccupied with the coronavirus, we've been hearing about authoritarian states across the world consolidating their power from Hungary to Russia to the United States, and India is no different. So we see something very similar happening in Kashmir. The coronavirus may have slowed down everyday life, but the processes of settler colonialism continue apace. And so more than ever, it is urgent to pay attention to these processes. And that's what this webinar is meant to do. So we're joined today by three speakers who will help us understand the significance of recent changes regarding domicile and residency in Kashmir and their role in engineering demographic changes in the area. So I'll start with our first speaker, Mirza Saaib. Mirza Saaib is a Kashmiri lawyer, a gold medalist graduate, and former president of the Students' Union at Nalsar University of Law. He's currently in the UK as a candidate for a Master's in Public Policy at the Blavatnik School of Government at the University of Oxford as a Wiedenfeld Hoffman Scholar. He has lectured on Kashmir at a number of venues all over the world, including the University of Cambridge, SOAS, and the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, the Bombay Press Club, and the University of Kashmir. So welcome, Mirza. And so I'll start with just a question and then we'll hear from you uninterrupted for several minutes in response. You recently wrote about the domicile law notification for The Wire, which is a news magazine based out of India. And I want to begin by just inviting you to just explain to us the new changes, right? So what are the new rules of domicile under the latest order? And how does a new domicile certificate work? And also, what are the implications of these changes, both for existing residents and for diasporic Kashmiris?
Thank you. Can I start?
Please.
Hello, everyone. So I'm told that we have about 600 people tuning in today, and a lot of Indians have also joined in to listen. So I want to start and end this talk by addressing them first. You see, liberal Indians like to tell themselves that a malaise has gripped India and it is causing a mutation in their country. But a closer examination reveals that Narendra Modi has not transformed India. He has merely unmasked it. It is nothing short of a grand delusion to think that the systemic dismantling of rights in Kashmir is the recent madness of a few in India. The domination and degradation of Kashmiris has always been greeted with festive celebration by Indians. And this underscores the fact that Modi did not make India, but it is rather the other way around. It is India that has made Modi. Whether it is Nehru's India or Vajpayee's India, there has always been a slow-burning offensive against Kashmiris. And under Modi, the only change is that it has now been funneled into a virulent anger to strip us of the rights that we have earned for ourselves after decades of struggle against feudalism under the Maharaja. And I must say this, that as Kashmiris, we are all well acquainted with the apathy of India. But today, India's priorities are especially pronounced when this change to domicile law is being made during an unprecedented economic and medical crisis, when the acute plight of exhausted and starving migrant laborers has given Indian apathy its new crowning hour of disgrace. Coming specifically to the question on domicile law, you see, pursuant to the unilateral annexation of Kashmir, which you mentioned, the Indian government has now announced rules for domiciles in Kashmir. These rules create new classes of citizens, of people who are now eligible for domicile certificates. And these certificates have been made mandatory for admission in schools. It enables the holder of the certificate to purchase land in Kashmir. It also enables them to get employment opportunities in Kashmir. And there are three classes of people, of citizens, that have now been created. The first class is of those people who have resided in Kashmir for a period of 15 years. The second is that of people who have studied in Kashmir for a period of 7 years. And finally is those people whose parents have served in Jammu and Kashmir for 10 years. These are all people who are eligible for domiciles. There are two more classes which I'll discuss further. But under these rules, they just provide a fast track procedure for issuance of Kashmiri domicile certificates within 15 days to people from any part of India who meet this criteria. The sense of urgency to legalize the region's new status is further underscored in these new rules, since any non-compliance with the time frame will attract a penalty of 50,000 rupees from the salary of an errant officer. I have a few points to make specifically on the new rules. First of all, these rules are a major departure from the established legal process in Kashmir, which exists after accession. Accession in itself is a contested issue, but moving on from there, specifically on these rules, it's a major departure from Article 35A, which empowered the Kashmiri Assembly to define a permanent resident. That has now been replaced by a domicile. Only permanent residents of Kashmir could apply for certain jobs and own land in Kashmir. But the definition under Section 3A of the new rules includes children of central government officials, All India service officers, officials of PSUs, public sector undertakings, autonomous bodies of the central government, public sector banks, officials of statutory bodies, officials of central universities, and any research institute of the central government. All of these people, if they have served in Jammu and Kashmir, they are eligible and their children are eligible. It also includes Hindus who are registered as migrants in Kashmir, West Pakistan refugees, and while at the same time, it denies Muslim migrants. Now, Kashmir had a law which was passed in 1982, which guaranteed the right of return to Kashmiri residents who had migrated to Pakistan between 1947 and 1954. Those people and their descendants were guaranteed the right of return. That law has been repealed. So people of Kashmiri origin who left Kashmir escaping violence, the Jammu massacre violence of 1947, they have now been denied a right to come back. So Kashmiris don't have a right to come back, but Indians who may never have lived in Kashmir, they can come to Kashmir and live over there. India has no qualms denying, and I'd like to draw attention to this point, that India has no qualms denying the Rohingya refugees a safe place to stay, but will go out on a limb to give Hindu refugees space in Kashmir. Contrast this with how Kashmiris have treated those refugees from West Pakistan. Kashmiris have given 4 canals of land to those people, but we have not given them permanent residence because they are not citizens of Kashmir. Compare this with how India has treated Rohingyas who are escaping a genocide. I ask the Indians who are present over here, what is the difference between a Rohingya refugee and a West Pakistan refugee? The only difference is that the Rohingyas are Muslim and the West Pakistan refugees who come to Kashmir are non-Muslim. They're mostly of Sikh origin who migrated in 1947. There were about 5,000 families who migrated. It's also pertinent to understand that under this new arrangement, and this is specifically for diaspora Kashmiris who are listening to us, that under the new arrangement, there is no space for a diaspora Kashmiri whose parents do not already have an existing certificate of permanent residence. If you do not have an existing certificate, the only way to get your domicile now is by living in the region for 15 years or by serving the Indian government for 10 years, because the rules are silent about whether the process of application for new PRCs will still exist. Effectively, the child of an Indian citizen is eligible even if that child has never lived in Kashmir. But the child of a diasporic Kashmiri is not eligible if the parent does not already possess an existing certificate of residence. There are many people in the Kashmiri diaspora around the world who do not have a PRC certificate, and their right of return was guaranteed under our own laws, but now all those laws have been repealed. Further, if a Kashmiri fails to meet the new criteria which has been established, whether that is done by malice, manipulation, or by design of the new rules, the revocation of our residency rights will inevitably lead to forcible transfer out of Kashmir in search of shelter and employment. You see, there are lots of people in Kashmir from vulnerable communities who do not own documentation, who do not have a PRC certificate. There are many people who have lost their documents in the floods that occurred in 2014, in the earthquake that took place earlier. So many people do not have documentation in the same way as Indians who are being subject to the NRC CAA exercise. Many of them do not have documents to prove their citizenship. So this is in a way a mini NRC that has been conducted for Kashmiris. Further, The domicile certificate is now, so that the PRC was earlier considered to be a conclusive proof of residence for Kashmiris, but now it is only it only has evidentiary value. So we are supposed to submit our PRC certificates to the Tehsildar, the officers designated under the rules. They will verify if we are now eligible for domicile. And unless we have those certificates, our children cannot get admission to schools in Kashmir, we cannot buy land in Kashmir, and nor will we be eligible for employment opportunities. So it is going to lead to a forcible transfer of Kashmiri population out of Kashmir and Indian population into Kashmir. This may qualify as a war crime under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, as well as a grave breach of the 4th Geneva Convention. Indians must also be reminded that the Kashmiri people's right to land of Kashmir, it was guaranteed under Article 35A in recognition of Kashmir's state subject law of 1927, as well as the Delhi Agreement of 1952, as well as Kashmir's own constitution. Now, the power to define a permanent resident, it comes under Section 6 of Kashmir's own constitution. And it's extremely important to remember that the Constitution of Jammu and Kashmir was not set up under an authority of the Indian Constitution, nor was the Constituent Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir set up by a sanction of the Government of India. It was set up by the state of Jammu and Kashmir itself, acting independently under the Maharaja's proclamation. The Indian Parliament lacks the legislative competence to amend it. Again, on the issue of Kashmir's own constitution, it is the final product of the constitution is one that has been achieved at by manipulation, because our elected leadership was arrested. Anyone that opposed the Indian government was jailed after 1953. But specifically on this point also, if we assume that the instrument of accession, as India would argue, is a legally valid document, the Indian Parliament still lacks the legislative competence to amend it. So the forcible transfer of Indians to Kashmir without the consent of the people in Kashmir is a violation of all established international law as well as Indian law. Now, I want to come to the effect of these changes. There are 2 points on this that I have to make. The first is that prior to the reorganization order that has been passed, there were a total of 4.8 lakh or just about 500,000 grade A to grade D government jobs which were available for Kashmiri residents. These government jobs are the primary source of employment in Kashmir because all private employment has been crushed in Kashmir. We have never been allowed to have any stability. We have now had 9 months of internet shutdown. So all e-commerce is completely destroyed. The fledgling little bit of e-commerce that we had, all business has been crippled. Just in November of last year, we lost $2.4 billion because of the shutdown. An innumerable number of people have had no employment opportunities in the last few months also. But the 2016 economic survey, even before all of this was done, we don't have a new economic survey done yet. So the 2016 economic survey report has pegged 25% of Jammu and Kashmir's population between the age group of 18 to 29 as unemployed. The new changes are only set to increase competition in employment in those 4.8 lakh, those 500,000 jobs that are available. The new rules will only increase competition in them because any Indian who meets the criteria can now apply for those jobs. It's also important to understand that Kashmiris and Indians are not placed at the same level for competition. In Kashmir, we have internet shutdowns frequently, schools get shut down, there's hartals and curfews, whereas Indians have access, unhindered, unrestricted access to their education. So expecting Kashmiris who live in a turmoil, in a conflict zone, to compete against Indians who have an unrestricted access to education and employment already in India, it is an unfair bar. The second thing I want to point out is that only 30% of land in Kashmir is habitable and fit for cultivation. Already, it has been admitted by the Mehbooba Mufti government, which is a pro-India government, that 4 lakh canals of land or 50,000 acres or 20,000 hectares of land are under illegal occupation of the Indian Army. I am not using that term illegal occupation. It is the Mehbooba Mufti government that has submitted a report to the Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir that uses the term illegal occupation because the Indian Army has not even taken permission from a pro-India government to occupy that land. So 4 lakh canals, 50,000 acres of our land is already under illegal occupation, and this land is the prime land in Kashmir. So there's very little land, habitable land to go around for these new domiciles that are coming in. Without deforestation in Kashmir, there is no space for them to go. The unplanned influx of Indians can cause an irreparable impact on the ecology and livelihood of the people of Kashmir. Finally, I want to come to some parallels which I can draw with similar things taking place elsewhere. There's a very clear parallel with Israel over here. It's relevant to mention that since 1995, Israel has been escalating the use of residency revocation as a punitive measure when the Israeli Interior Ministry started reinterpreting the 1952 law of entry. So Israel uses three kinds of discriminatory provisions to forcibly transfer Palestinians out. The reason I'm highlighting this is because even now, some Kashmiris feel that things might not get so bad for us because there's 10 million of us in Kashmir. They can't possibly take all of us out of there. But you have to draw these parallels to see what is happening elsewhere in the world. So the first criteria that they use is if a Palestinian has been living for an extended period abroad, he or she loses the right to residency. The second thing is based on a 1995 High Court judgment. Palestinians need to establish that their center of life is in Jerusalem to establish residency rights. If you're unable to do that, you lose your residency rights. The third is if you're accused of breaching allegiance or minimum loyalty to Israel. In 2006, this provision was used against 4 members of Hamas who had already been elected to the Palestinian Legislative Council. Customary international law, customary humanitarian law explicitly forbids an occupying country from demanding allegiance from an occupied population. But through brute force, these things are being done around the world. Now, assessing from these developments taking place, it is quite likely that the Kashmiri landscape will be seeded with predatory, militarized settlements in a hegemonic fashion, blatantly similar to Palestine. The implications can only be calamitous. But the threat of demographic change, the loss of livelihood, the increased competition for scarce resources, it is bound to electrify an already incensed population. Indians must realize that you have pushed us so far that we have nothing to lose now. And in any sensible democracy, this situation would be alarming. But the authoritarian and xenophobic actions that have been seen over the last 1 year suggest that Modi's India is neither sensible nor democratic. In conclusion, I would just like to make a call to action for any conscientious Indians who are listening to us. Conscientious Indians must reject Modi's offer. This is not for Kashmiris to reject. We will anyways reject it. We have been rejecting far more than just this recent change. It is for Indians to think, अगर आपको अपने वतन से मोहब्बत है, अगर आपको उसकी इज्जत की कोई फिक्र है, तो मोदी के ऑफर को ठुकरा दीजिए और इस बात पे गौर कीजिए. What kind of union of India are you forming if the people of that union do not want to be with you? If your dreams of unification are forced through militarization, it is not a union, it can only be an occupation. If you enter our land without permission to create your one nation structure that denies us Kashmiris any political agency, that strips us of equal participation, then we are within our rights to oppose that structure. And in response to what you have done, Kashmiris have long realized that we cannot indulge in the luxury of despair and despondency. We need to, and we will continue to engage in the persistent labor of resistance and hope, despite the reckless violation of our rights and democracy by the Indian state. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have towards the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mirza, for that really helpful overview of how these new rules work and their devastating impacts. And I know we're going to sort of get a little bit more into, you touched on some things that Imraan is also going to be speaking about in terms of the environmental and ecological impact, and then later Fozia. So I think it'll make for a nice, sort of well-connected conversation.